Good evening, tribute, and welcome back to another Tales of the Hunger Games After 100 episode. Before we begin, I'd like to apologize for not uploading in the last few weeks as I was busy with stuff in the real world. I'd also like to thank Andrew Maclaine and Christian Blanco for creating the wonderful art and story backline in this series. As well, I'd also like to thank Laurent Ben-Mimount, sorry if I mispronounced your name, for creating a piece of art used in this video. So without further ado, let's hop straight into the video. And also, thank you to Red Dragon and Khen Siapco for helping me revise. A week before the 105th Hunger Games was set to take place, President Cardew made an announcement on Capitol TV. In his announcement, Cardew described the terms on which the 6th quinquennial quell would take place. Cardew stated that as a reminder to the districts that the youngest among them would pay for the actions of the old. This year, the tributes would be reaped from 12-year-olds only. This caused lots of cheering throughout Snow Square, as Capitol citizens theorized how the games would be different. Solomon Grew, victor of the 104th Hunger Games, arrived in District 8 after a few rowdy reapings. After Mayor Wilson had given his speech about the importance of the games, Solomon took to the stage and began the reapings. As Solomon looked out into the sea of purple, he slowly lifted a name from the female reaping bowl, which he announced to be Aslan Joseph. A camera quickly found a short girl with blonde curls and neat clothing within the small crowd of tributes. Upon realizing she was reaped, Aslan cried and begged her peers to volunteer for her. However, unsurprisingly, nobody volunteered for her. As Aslan was dragged to the stage by peacekeepers, Solomon seemed shocked by her behavior. However, he remained calm and shook her hand. Lauren commented that she liked Aslan's bright purple dress. However, she did not like the way Aslan's hair was done. Khen, however, replied that he liked her hair, but not her dress. Once Aslan was standing still behind Solomon, he reached into the male reaping bowl and drew a name from the very bottom. Once Solomon had slowly walked to the center of the stage, he unfolded the piece of paper and announced this to be Pattern Mahoney. A camera swiftly panned onto a young boy with short brown hair and blue eyes. Lauren immediately stated that some people would die for his eyes, while Khen scoffed in the background. Pattern's peers comforted him and gave him encouraging nods as he walked to the stage. Once Pattern was safely standing on the stage, Mayor Wilson wished that the odds would be in the population's favor, and proceeded to dismiss the population. However, as Mayor Wilson stepped away from the microphone, Solomon stepped forward and performed a three-finger salute. Immediately, peacekeepers dragged Solomon away from the stage. However, the youths in the enclosure raised their hands in the same gesture upon realizing that cameras were focused on them. This caused a lot of rioting and fighting to occur, as Solomon, Aslan, and Pattern were dragged into the town hall. Inside the town hall, Aslan was visited by her older brother, as well as her parents. All three of them wished her luck in the games, whilst crying. Aslan's brother told her to use her fabric skills to use within the games, which Aslan promised to do. The meeting was not very eventful. However, towards the end of the meeting, her parents told Aslan that they loved her, which caused them to embrace amidst tears and words of comfort. Pattern was visited by his parents, as well as his younger brother. His brother entertained Pattern during the meeting, which made him smile frequently, while his father rambled on with advice for Pattern during the games. His mother, however, simply sat there and cried, and when the meeting was over, the four of them embraced. The two tributes were then taken down to the train station, where they boarded the train to the capital. On the train, Pattern and Aslan chatted for a while, and it soon became evident that the pair knew each other from school. Pattern talked to Aslan about their different teachers, whilst gossiping about their classmates. After a while, Ava Barrick, victor of the 81st Hunger Games, walked in, with a buffet behind her. Ava pulled out 2 large pieces of fabric, and handed each of her tributes a piece. Pattern and Aslan both seemed confused, However, Ava gave them each a needle and some thread, before telling them to create something. Ava then stated that whoever made the most creative design would earn a delicacy from the buffet. Immediately, the tributes began to work, while Ava surveyed their designs. Pattern took his time and slowly turned the purple fabric into a large figure 8. Ava seemed impressed that someone Pattern's age could do this. However, she looked at Aslan's design, where she sewed a small map of District 8 onto her fabric. Although Ava seemed equally impressed with both designs, judging by her tributes' ages, she quickly asked them how they would be useful in the arena. Both Pattern and Aslan stood still, until Ava wheeled the buffet over and kindly told them to have some food. Ava then sat down at the table to eat with them, while talking about different ways textiles could be used as an advantage during the games. After eating, Ava turned on the screen and showed her tributes a video of the 81st Games, which she had won many years prior. Ava explained that the armor she had throughout the games had saved her from a fatal spider bite, and also helped prevent a lot of other injuries. This seemed to impress Aslan and Pattern, and soon Ava had given them some various materials and told them to create something that would be useful in the arena. After a bit of time, Aslan showed Ava a net she had made out of the fabric. However, Ava thrust her hand through the fabric and broke the net. She proceeded to tell Aslan that though her ideas were good, however, her net would need to be stronger. Ava then proceeded to look at Pattern's work. Pattern had created a trap, which could trip tributes and tie up their legs. Ava seemed impressed. However, she pointed out that the trap was too thick, and therefore was easily noticeable by other tributes. Ava proceeded to praise her tributes before letting them enjoy some more food from the bar, while showing them the rest of her games. As night fell outside the carriage, Ava pulled out 3 wine glasses. However, Aslan immediately stated that she was not allowed to drink alcohol. Ava laughed and told Aslan that she was not giving out alcohol. Aslan watched as Ava brought a bottle of lemonade onto the table. Ava then proceeded to pour the lemonade into 3 glasses, and after a toast to District 8, they drank all the lemonade. Ava went on to tell her tributes to go to sleep, before exiting the carriage. The next day, the train pulled into Snow Station. Before they left the train, Ava told her tributes how to act, before opening the door and escorting them onto the platform. Both Aslan and Pattern seemed fazed by the bright lights flashing in their faces, as they stepped onto the platform. However, they did as they were told and shook hands with various capital citizens, while accepting photos. Like other tributes this year, Aslan and Pattern seemed shy due to their young age. Despite this, a few citizens managed to convince them to talk. After a while, Ava led her tributes away from the station, and towards her limousine. As the limousine drove towards the accommodation center, Ava explained that she would be their stylist. Therefore, at the accommodation center, Ava immediately took her tributes' measurements and prepared a variety of different fabrics. After a while of pondering, Ava concluded that a dark purple dress with multiple different colors. As Ava got to work designing, she turned on the TV and instructed her tributes to watch the reaping games of District 2, which were now taking place. Because of the quell twists, this year only 8 male volunteers and 7 female volunteers competed in the reaping games. As usual, the games took place in the district's mudplate, which was getting old. Of the female volunteers, Ceres Bartul fought bravely in the reaping games. Ceres worked by herself and ripped off her opponent's bracelets by holding their hands down with her legs, which stopped them from being able to defend themselves or to rip off her bracelets. Eventually, Ceres managed to win the title of female tribute after fighting Medusa Glee, who had only 1 bracelet remaining on her right hand, which was easily ripped off by Ceres. As for the male volunteers, Vulcan Helix won the role of male tribute after he worked with his close friend Jupiter and ripped off many bracelets together. Eventually, Vulcan earned the role of tribute after a spectacular wrestling match with Jupiter. After the reaping games, Ceres and Vulcan were groomed, dressed, and taken to the stage, where they were formally announced to be tributes. After Ceres and Vulcan had shaken hands and had posed for photos, they were taken into the town hall to speak with their parents. These meetings passed by uneventfully, with both of them promising to return home with victory and promising to put on a show in the games. They were then taken to the train, where their mentor was waiting. Once Ceres and Vulcan had stepped onto the train, their mentor, Maxima Lu, victor of the 79th Hunger Games, greeted them, and told them to sit down. Ceres and Vulcan both obeyed, and listened carefully as Maxima introduced herself and explained why she was mentoring them. Maxima stated that Rubius Dalton, victor of the 86th Hunger Games and usual mentor of District 2, was doing some business in the capital this year, and therefore she had been called to mentor. Both Ceres and Vulcan seemed to know who Maxima was, but they did not seem to have met her before. Maxima proceeded to quiz her tributes on various fighting techniques, while examining them carefully. After a while, a tray of food was brought in, which the tributes ate with Maxima. While eating, the tributes watched the replay of the reapings of District 1. Ceres said that she wanted to kill the female tribute Lazuli, while Vulcan commented on how ugly the male tribute Rollex's teeth looked. After a while of analyzing their opponents' various weaknesses, Maxima announced that she was tired, and therefore headed to her own private carriage, while the tributes socialized and talked about their lives in District 2. After the train arrived in Snow Station, Maxima quickly led her tributes off the train, where they socialized and interacted with various capital citizens. Vulcan signed autographs and promised multiple citizens that he would win the games, while Ceres took pictures and gave various compliments to other citizens. After a while of picture-taking and interacting, Maxima called her tributes over and led them into the limousine, which took them to the accommodation center. Once at the accommodation center, the two tributes were met by their stylists, Melody Fling and Pastor Greed. Both Melody and Pastor greeted the tributes and asked them to sit down, before taking their measurements and making some design sketches. As Melody and Pastor worked on their designs, Rubius Dalton entered the apartment. Rubius greeted the tributes and shook their hands, before congratulating them on winning the district reaping games. Rubius then went on to ask them a few questions about fighting techniques, before sitting down on the couch and beginning to drink a large bottle of whiskey. In the apartment above, Ava had created a flower using the fabric she had brought, and after some cutting and stitching, she had designed a dark purple suit and dress, as well as some fascinators to go with it. As Ava began to help Pattern and Aslan try on these outfits, there was a knock on the door. Ava quickly said, "Enter," and Wither McCain, victor of the 103rd Hunger Games, walked in. Wither greeted Ava, and complimented the designs she had made. However, Wither told Ava that although her designs were good, the current best designs featured more technology. Ava laughed and told Wither that she would design what she wanted to, which Wither agreed to. She then wished Wither luck as a mentor in the upcoming games, before going back to designing. Meanwhile, in the apartment for District 2, Melody and Pastor had designed golden armor, along with bright silver swords attached to the tributes' backs. When these outfits were tried on, Rubius seemed very pleased, while Maxima applauded. The outfits were then stored in the closets, while the tributes went to bed. The next day, the tribute chariot parade was held. This caused a lot of excitement through the capital, as citizens wondered how this year's quill twist would change designs. Before the parade, Ceres and Vulcan spoke with Rolex and Lazuli, both of one, and analyzed their opponents' various weaknesses. Pattern and Aslan spent their time before the parade on their carriages, where they stroked the horses and listened to Ava talk. As Ava spoke about keeping calm during the parade, Asha Seidel, victor of the 78th Hunger Games, walked over. Ava glared at Asha as the latter smoked her pipe. However, Asha did not say a word before walking away. The chariot call then sounded, which caused Asha to return to her carriage, while Ava nodded encouragingly towards her tributes. The parade started with Rolex and Lazuli, both of one, who were dressed in diamond-studded outfits, each with a pickaxe held at their side. This received multiple cheers. However, Ceres and Vulcan also received a lot of cheers after emerging in full golden armor. Although this was well received, many citizens in the capital began to complain that District 2's outfits were too repetitive, as they almost always featured the same golden armor. A few chariots down the parade, Pattern and Aslan wore their purple outfits proudly, while holding hands and smiling. Midway through the parade, Charbonne, of 5, sneezed, which caused her hat to fall off, while Gueva, of 11, dropped her fake apple after pretending to bite it. This year, Bravo and Malayev and Aroma Paddock did not style for any district, which they later stated was because they wanted to have some time off. Rubius seemed fairly angry at the fact that District 2 had not won Best Dressed. However, he kept his composure and ushered his tributes to bed before he spoke with Maxima. As the tributes from 2 slept, Rubius allegedly spoke with Maxima about ways to find better stylists for next year, which Maxima seemed to ignore mostly. More debate surged through the capital as citizens rushed to vote for their favorite outfits. Eventually, it was announced that Faro and Zizania, both of 9, had won the Best Dressed title because of the way their wheat outfits were smoking lightly. That night, Ava seemed impressed with the outfits. However, she seemed glad with what she had made, and therefore treated her tributes with a large dinner while talking about training the next day. Ava spoke with her tributes about what different stations they should head to, and to not avoid the careers. Early in the morning, Rubius awoke his tributes, gave them some breakfast, and took them down to the training center, where they were the first tributes there. Khen was also present, where he read a newspaper while sipping coffee in the corner. Khen greeted Rubius, before telling him the tasers were in the staff room. Rubius nodded and led his tributes over to the swords, where he gave them personal advice on how to use a sword, as well as how to fight well. Sirius seemed to be skilled with a sword. However, Vulcan stated that he was more of a knife user, which seemed to slightly disappoint Rubius. However, he led the tributes to the knives station afterward, where Vulcan showed deadly accuracy in throwing. After a while of practicing, Rubius lifted some weights with his tributes. However, midway through their training session, a few other tributes began to arrive. After a while, all tributes had arrived in the training center, which caused Khen to stand up and call Rubius over. Rubius took his tributes over to the center of the center, where he and Khen explained the rules. Khen also explained that this year, Rubius had kindly offered to help work alongside the training staff. After some light applause, the tributes were dismissed to work in whichever station they wished. Ceres and Vulcan immediately walked over to Rolex and Lazuli, both of 1, and formally introduced themselves. The pair then looked around at the various other tributes training, and eventually decided to head to the speed station first. Rolex noticed Vulcan and Ceres' sweat, and asked why they were sweating early. However, Ceres quickly grinned and told them that the early bird gets the worm. The 4 of them then walked over to the speed station, where they ran a few laps around the track to get warmed up. Pattern and Aslan had agreed to stay together during training, and although they had been informed not to purposefully avoid the careers' challenges, they seemed to stray as far away from the careers as possible. The pair spent the morning working in the textile station, where they made various traps and nets from the different fabrics provided. After a bit of this, Pattern asked Aslan if she wanted to try the obstacle course, to which she agreed. The pair headed to the obstacle course, where they tried to complete it as fast as possible. After Ceres had finished running, she waited for her fellow careers to catch up, before motioning towards the weapon stations, which were empty. Lazuli agreed to work with weapons. However, Rolex and Vulcan decided to head to the obstacle course, where Soil of 11, Pattern, Aslan, and Styria of 3 were all working to complete. Rolex looked at Vulcan before the boys ran over and completed it in a record time for this year. After finishing, the boys laughed and watched their various other opponents complete the obstacle course, while chatting slightly. On the other hand, Sirius had led Lazuli to the storage station, where they agreed to duel each other. This duel seemed to cause a lot of excitement throughout the training center, as multiple staff members gathered around to watch. Once the battle had begun, Sirius and Lazuli seemed hesitant about striking. However, upon hearing Rubius's encouragement, Ceres jumped forward and thrust her spear at Lazuli's chest pad. Lazuli did not seem to be expecting this, and therefore she fell backwards. Although Lazuli managed to put up a strong fight against Ceres while down, Ceres eventually overpowered her and won the sword fight. When Aslan and Pattern had both finished the obstacle course, the 2 of them watched the sword fight between the 2 girls, after moving to the survival station. At the survival station, the 2 of them watched Vulcan and Rolex examining various other tributes. Aslan suggested that the two of them head to the stealth station, where they could practice hiding. However, Pattern was tapped on the shoulder seconds after she said this. He jumped and turned around, but seemed relieved to realize that this was not a career. Spruce and Ellery, both of 7, had walked up to the tributes from 8 and asked them quietly to an alliance. Pattern looked up at Ava in the mentoring gallery, who was nodding her head. Pattern then told Aslan that they should accept the alliance, which they did. The 4 of them then spent the remainder of the morning working in the stealth station. Inside the station, Aslan asked if Spruce and Ellery had worked with axes. However, both of them stated that they were not old enough to be working with axes, as was the rule in District 7. This seemed to slightly disappoint Pattern. However, he asked if they should invite any other tributes to their alliance. After the careers had regrouped in the knife station, they practiced throwing knives against the targets on the wall. Vulcan seemed to impress the tributes from 1 with his accuracy. However, Ceres spent more time sharpening her knives than actually throwing them. Eventually, it became clear that Vulcan was the most skilled tribute with knives this year. After some time in the knife station, the 4 careers headed over to the spear station, where they seemed to show equal strength. Vulcan and Lazuli shared a few tips for throwing with each other, while they watched their district partners aiming at moving targets. A brief lunchtime was then held. During lunch, Vulcan and Ceres were instructed by Rubeus to keep a close eye on the other tributes, as they were forming alliances. Ceres understood. However, she focused on eating her steak. Vulcan, on the other hand, asked Rubeus about the other 2 careers, to which Rubeus replied that they were not threats. At a different table, Pattern and Aslan ate their food quietly, while Ava instructed them to expand their alliance with District 7. Ava gave them a few tribute suggestions, before telling them to be aware of the careers. Lunchtime was then ended, as Khen and Rubeus ushered the tributes back into the training center. Ceres and Vulcan immediately ran over to Spruce, Ellery, Pattern, and Aslan, and asked what they were doing. Spruce jumped and replied that they were training in the camouflage station. However, Vulcan told them that they looked bored, before challenging Spruce to a knife throwing competition. Spruce declined. However, Rubeus approached and took both boys to the knife station, where he explained the rules of the competition. Spruce seemed to be sweating a lot. However, during the competition, Vulcan threw with great precision, which saw him beating Spruce with a score of 34-6. After Spruce lumbered back to his allies, Ceres challenged Aslan to a sword fight. To Ceres' surprise, Aslan accepted, and both girls were geared up. Unfortunately for Aslan, she seemed to regret accepting the challenge a few rounds into the fight, and was soon easily beaten by Ceres with a score of 11-0. After Ceres and Vulcan seemed satisfied with their efforts at humiliating the outliers, they met Rolex and Lazuli in the archery station, where they chatted and shot arrows at different targets. For the remainder of training, Pattern, Aslan, Spruce, and Ellery spent their time carefully hiding from the careers. However, they managed to form alliances with Pharaoh and Zazania, both of 9, and Molar and Cuspid, both of 12. This alliance seemed to worry Rubeus from the mentoring gallery above, and despite his efforts to make eye contact with his tributes, they did not notice him. That night, Pattern and Aslan were congratulated by Ava for making strong alliances with other tributes. Ava then spent some time with her tributes, telling them how to act for the training score assessments the next day, before ushering them to bed after a warm glass of milk. Downstairs, Rubeus reprimanded his tributes for allowing the outliers to form an alliance of 8, and told them that this may lead to their demise. As Rubeus ranted, Ceres apologized and stated that they would work hard to demolish this alliance in the bloodbath, while Vulcan looked around for Maxima, who was not in the apartment. The next morning, the tribute training scores were assessed. This year, the game makers announced that they would be grading less harshly because of the age of the tributes. Therefore, the careers unsurprisingly scored highly. Rolex and Ceres both scored 9s, while Lazuli and Vulcan scored high 10s. Obviously, this was suspected to have been due to highly skilled weaponry displays. Pattern scored a 6th, after presumably showing various ways to create a trap with wires. However, game makers seemed to deem the skill unuseful. Following pattern, Aslan scored a 6 as well, for allegedly showing the same skill and talent Pattern had. Eventually, the lowest scores of this year belonged to Batareo of 3 and Zoe of 10, both of whom scored low 3s. It was noted that this year, the assessments took longer than usual, which was rumored to have been due to the game makers questioning the tributes about their lives and personalities. However, this theory was never strongly supported and therefore generally dismissed. That evening, Maxima arrived at the apartment, where she watched Pastor and Melody design the interview outfits, while Rubius briefed his tributes on the interviews the next day. Both Ceres and Vulcan showed clear excitement for the interviews, which seemed to make Rubius happy. Ava, on the other hand, designed some clothes for the interviews herself, while telling her tribute stories about past interviews that went successfully. These stories were not all true. However, they seemed to raise her tribute's self-esteem for the interviews the next night. The following night, Lauren hosted the interviews warmly, and began the night off by welcoming the audience to her 5th year of hosting. Lauren then called the first tribute, Lazuli, to the stage. Both Lazuli and Rolex's interviews passed eventfully, as both of them explained how they could win against tributes their age, while keeping a proud manner. After Rolex, Ceres walked onto the stage in a sparkling golden suit. Ceres shook Lauren's hand and sat down, before politely joking around with her and thanking the Capitol for her support. She also made it clear that she planned on winning the games with style, which triggered much cheering as she left the stage. Following Ceres, Vulcan approached his interview with a bright smile along with a dark orange suit. Vulcan spent his interview talking with Lauren about his expectations for the upcoming games, as well as what he looked forward to the most. He explained that he wanted to win by supporting his family, as well as making his district proud. Vulcan ended his interview by telling Capitol viewers not to give up hope on District 2 yet. A few more interviews that passed with signed with remarks from the Capitol. Aslan walked on stage, in a bright purple dress designed by Ava. Aslan spent her interview talking about her passion for fabrics and design, which seemed to bore Capitol viewers. However, they seemed slightly interested when Lauren ended her interview by asking Aslan if she would design a dress for her if she won. During Pattern's interview, he hinted at multiple bonds he had made with other tributes, which saw audience members listening carefully. However, he also stated that he would do his best to win. This caused many cheers within the audience. The remaining interviews passed with few highlights. Most notably were those of Huey of 10 and Soil of 11, both of whom claimed to be strong tributes born for victory. Following Molar of 12's interview, game maker Blanco walked on stage and apologized for not preparing any events for citizens in Snow Square this year. However, he did promise to put on a show for his first year as game maker for Quell. He also stated that he had found an interesting way to express the theme of the Quell twist this year, and was excited to put it into action. This caused many rumors and theories to fly around the Capitol. That night, most mentors gave their respected tributes final words of advice, and told the tributes to get a good night's rest the next day. In the morning, the tributes were awoken and flown to the arena. There, they dressed in casual attire, which featured a shirt, sweatpants, and a zip-up sweater of their district colors. In his holding room, Aslan was visited by Ava, who wished her luck and helped her dress. Aslan hugged Ava and thanked her for her support throughout the week. Ava seemed to be close to tears as Aslan stepped into her tube. Once Aslan was safe inside her tube, Ava exited the room to visit Pattern. Pattern had dressed himself, and when Ava arrived, she gave him a few last words of advice. Pattern seemed to understand Ava, and the pair embraced before Pattern entered his tube. Meanwhile, Ceres was visited by Maxima, who told her to win and to be wary of her allies. Ceres proceeded to thank Maxima, before stepping in her tube and smiling. Maxima smiled back, before nodding her head respectfully and watching Ceres for her last few minutes. Rubius had entered Vulcan's lunchroom during this time, and the two shook hands. Vulcan thanked Rubius for mentoring him throughout the week, while Rubeus accepted his thanks and told Vulcan to win the games. Vulcan replied that he would win these games, to which Rubeus nodded. Rubeus then told Vulcan to not underestimate anyone, and to watch out for his allies. Vulcan agreed before entering his tube and watching Rubeus. The podiums then slowly ascended into the cornucopia clearing. This year, the games took place in an old capital estate. This year's arena took place in a large mansion, which used to be owned by former President Salazar Gall's secretary, Cosmo Gall. This mansion and its surrounding were more than a square kilometer in size, and provided multiple hiding spots for tributes due to its unique location, surrounded by trees. The mansion itself was roughly the size of 2 medium-sized capital homes, and had been well furnished in the days leading up to the games. Within the mansion, there were several large bedrooms and washrooms, a movie theater, an indoor spa, a medical center which consisted of a dentist chair and an operating table, a massive kitchen, and a gaming room. The mansion also consisted of the traditional rooms one would find in a house, as well as a lounge. In front of the mansion, there lay multiple neatly trimmed fields, trees, and a small fountain. Around the mansion, more forest, a small pool, a tennis court, a boiler room, and a golf course could be found, all which provided interesting places for tributes to hide. This year, there was no cornucopia structure, but instead, the supplies were scattered around the field in front of the mansion. Within the cornucopia, there lay multiple swords, spears, and knives, along with some bread and water scattered around. Many viewers in Snow Square let out sighs of interest in this unique arena as the countdown began from 60. Aslan, of 8, was positioned with her back to the front doors of the mansion. When her podium had risen, she looked directly towards the cornucopia, and then towards the mansion behind her. Upon noticing the podiums placed so close together, she seemed intent on running to the mansion behind her. However, after noticing the plethora of supplies in front of her, she looked towards a loaf of bread. Pattern of 8 had made eye contact with Cuspid and Pharaoh, who were standing on podiums at his side. After nodding at each other, the three looked towards the cornucopia, where they tried to ignore the eyes of the couriers. Meanwhile, Vulcan F2 had focused on the three outliers' nodding heads, and therefore he appeared ready to grab a knife. However, upon noticing Aslan standing 2 podiums to his left, he licked his lips and made eye contact with Ceres. Ceres F2 had seen the supplies, as well as the mansion on the other side of the center area. Ceres briefly made eye contact with Vulcan, before looking at a sword in the center of the supplies. The gong proceeded to boom out, which saw multiple tributes run inward. Because of how closely the tributes were positioned, there resulted in a lot of carnage during the bloodbath. After running off her podium, Aslan was pushed by Vulcan, who tackled her to the ground and punched her in the face. Aslan screamed as blood poured out. However, despite Vulcan's attempts, he was not able to successfully snap her neck. Vulcan then swore and punched Aslan unconscious, before running forward and grabbing a set of throwing knives. Vulcan then loosened the rope before throwing one at Atlanta of 6. Vulcan grinned with satisfaction upon seeing the knife sink deeply into Atlanta's head. However, he suddenly turned around upon hearing Ceres yell for him to watch out. Ceres had run off her podium towards the cornucopia, where she grabbed a sword and looked around. She proceeded to slash Lachlan of 4 in the chest with her sword. As Lachlan fell to the ground, Ceres turned around and gasped upon seeing Zizania of 9 and Pattern running towards Vulcan with spears. Ceres yelled at Vulcan to watch out before stepping backward and guarding the supplies with Rolex and Lazuli. When the gong had sounded, Pattern had run off his podium with Zizania, and the pair had both grabbed spears while the couriers were distracted. They then ran towards Vulcan. However, as they approached him from behind, Ceres called Vulcan's name, which made him turn around and thrust his knife into Zizania's head. Pattern screamed as his blood splattered all over him. However, Vulcan noticed Soil of 11 running for a spear, and therefore went to chase him instead. As Pattern ran with his spear, he noticed Aslan, who was now slowly coming to. Pattern quickly ran over to Aslan, and there he told her to run. Aslan realized what was happening and quickly ran with Pattern to a nearby hedge. From the hedge, Aslan and Pattern waved at their other allies from District 12, 9, and 7, before the 7 of them ran away and towards the mansion. As the tributes began to clear out from the bloodbath, Vulcan, Ceres, Rolex, and Lazuli gathered in the center of the cornucopia, where they assessed the fallen tributes. Rolex and Ceres then went around and performed life checks to ensure that all tributes had fallen, while Vulcan and Lazuli decided which supplies to gather. After a while of searching, Ceres stabbed her sword into the still twitching body of Hui of 10, while Lazuli finished off Gueva of 11. The 4 careers then gathered around the supplies and decided to gather all their remaining food, while hiding the weapons. Eventually, the group seemed to agree that a nearby hedge was the best place to hide the weapons. Therefore, the careers dragged the few remaining weapons to a nearby hedge, where they buried them under some dirt while hidden inside the hedge. The careers seemed confident that this would hide the supplies well enough. They then agreed to travel around the arena in search of tributes. However, they would not enter the main mansion for now. During this time, Pattern, Aslan, Bruce of 7, Ellery of 7, Pharaoh of 9, Molar of 12, and Cuspid of 12 had run through the unlocked doors of the mansion and into the central living room, where they regrouped and looked at supplies they had managed to procure from the cornucopia. Eventually, they discovered that they had 3 spears, 6 loaves of bread, and 3 bottles of water. Pattern stated that the water would need to be rationed, while the spears should be given to the strongest. Immediately, Muller and Pharaoh volunteered. They each took a spear. However, Ellery and Cuspid seemed to have a fight about who should get the spear. After a lot of arguing, Pattern took over and indicated a nearby couch. Pattern stated that whoever threw the spear closest to the pillow would keep the spear. The girls both agreed, and soon they aimed at the pillow. Cuspid, who had borrowed Molar's spear, threw hers a large distance away from the pillow, which saw Ellery win the spear after hitting the bottom of the couch. Cuspid seemed annoyed. However, she handed her spear back to Molar before sitting down on the couch. From there, the group was able to keep an eye on the mansion's front doors, while getting to know each other better. As they introduced themselves, Pattern sat near Aslan, who had taken a hard blow to the head. Aslan seemed sick. However, Pattern comforted her and told her that she was fine. As he said that, 5 cannons sounded. The 4 careers had ventured around the mansion when these cannons sounded. Lazuli looked around before stating that these must be the bloodbath cannons. Ceres and Vulcan rolled their eyes as Lazuli stated that they should head forward to the nearby tennis court, as they had not checked there yet. Ceres, Vulcan, and Rolex agreed, and therefore the 4 of them ran toward the tennis court. As they approached, Rolex tapped Vulcan on the shoulder before whispering at them to walk. Vulcan scoffed and called Rolex unfit. However, Rolex quickly replied that he had heard someone nearby. As the 4 continued to walk, Zoe of 10 ran out of a nearby bush and darted towards the mansion. Rolex and the other careers immediately turned around before running towards Zoe. Zoe screamed, and despite her head start, Vulcan threw a knife, which hit her in the back. As Zoe fell to the ground, Vulcan asked which of the careers wanted the kill. However, before anyone could respond, Rolex stepped forward and stabbed Zoe in the head with his knife. Ceres and Vulcan both seemed offended. However, Lazuli agreed that it was Rolex who had told them to slow down. Vulcan seemed to understand, and therefore the careers continued to travel around the arena. When Zoe's cannon had sounded, the outlier pack had frozen. However, they realized that the cannon was not of a tribute inside the mansion, and therefore they continued their activities. As they chatted and occasionally ate some food, they all froze upon hearing the door creaking open. Siri and Batareo, both of 3, had opened the door, and upon seeing the outlier pack, they both screamed and began to run. Molar and Pharaoh immediately jumped up and began to chase them. Despite Pattern's protesting, and within minutes, the 2 boys had caught up to the tributes from 3 and had stabbed them in the head. As the cannon sounded, Molar and Pharaoh slapped hands before walking back into the mansion. Inside the mansion, Pattern warned them about doing this again, as it could result in them being seen. However, Mueller and Faro both seemed to agree that it was more important that their competition be eliminated. Unbeknownst to the outliers, the careers had noticed them running and killing Siri and Batareo. However, Siri stated that it would be better to infiltrate the mansion the next day, as that way some of the tributes may eliminate each other and make it safer for them to enter the mansion. Siri also correctly guessed that the entrance was trapped, and therefore it would be hard for them to get in through the front doors without getting attacked or harmed. The other careers seemed to agree, and as night fell, the four of them set camp at the woods near the boiler room, where Vulcan kept watch while the others slept. At night, the portraits of Batareo and Siri, both of 3, Lachlan of 4, Atlanta of 6, Xania of 9, Huey and Zoe of 10, and Gueva of 11 were shown in the sky outside. These portraits were also shown on screens around the mansion, which told tributes that there were 16 tributes remaining. When the outlier pack saw these portraits, they mostly gasped and did not react otherwise. However, Pharaoh gasped and seemed shocked upon seeing Zazania's portrait. Pattern noticed this and comforted him while telling him that Zazania's death was not in vain. This seemed to comfort him, and therefore Pattern offered to take watch with Pharaoh's spear, while the others slept. The careers did not seem to react to these portraits either. Vulcan only awoke the others upon seeing these portraits, and told Lazuli to keep watch while he slept. In the morning, a light rain began to fall in the arena, which saw most tributes seek cover. When the outlier pack awoke, Spruce rubbed his eyes and yawned, before asking if there was any food. Pattern immediately reached for the bread. However, as he was about to give Spruce some, Cuspid asked if Aslan was okay. Pattern handed Spruce the bread, before looking at Aslan, who seemed to have trouble breathing. Pattern gasped, while Mueller and Cuspid quickly assessed her health. After a tense moment, Mueller declared that Aslan had suffered a major concussion, and was in a type of coma. Pattern gasped again, before asking if there was any way to deal with this. Cuspid sadly replied that there was no way, and that Aslan would now provide more of a burden than a help to the group. This caused Pattern to cry slightly. However, he turned away a few moments later and told the group to just do it. After a cannon had sounded, Pattern turned away to see Pharaoh cleaning the spear, while a hole in the mansion's roof closed. Pattern proceeded to act like nothing had happened, and casually suggested that they booby-trap the entrance of the mansion. Pharaoh and Spruce both agreed. However, Ellery stated that they did not have enough spears to booby-trap the entrance. Pattern seemed to think for a second, before stating that he could construct a trap out of fabric. Although this seemed to be a popular idea amongst the outliers, Cuspid quickly pointed out that there was no fabric. This seemed to disappoint Pattern. However, as he was about to speak, Spruce quickly pointed out Charbon of 5, who had descended the stairs of the mansion. Charbon screamed and called for her district partner, Dame, to run. However, Pharaoh and Ellery had immediately grabbed their spears and began to run. Charbon screamed again, as Pharaoh and Ellery appeared to be gaining. However, as the two ran up the stairs, Charbon suddenly turned around and pushed Ellery down. Ellery screamed as she fell down the flight of stairs she had just descended. However, Pharaoh had thrust a spear through Dame's neck before he could do the same. Charbon screamed as Dame's cannon sounded, and a chase occurred, with Pharaoh running through the mansion after Charbon. Charbon continued to scream until she reached a dead end down a hallway. Pharaoh proceeded to ask Charbon what she was intending to do to his friends. However, before Charbon could answer, the glass window to her left shattered. Pharaoh and Charbon both tried to shield themselves as they were shattered in glass, and both appeared relieved to see that nobody was attempting to enter through the window. Pharaoh then quickly stabbed Charbon in the head, before running downstairs and telling his allies what had happened. Upon hearing Aslan and Dame's cannons, Rulux quickly jokingly suggested to Vulcan that they smashed a window of the mansion with a heavy rock they had found while searching for tributes the other day. Vulcan seemed to contemplate this. However, upon seeing the girls who were playing word games with each other, he told Rolex that the first person to smash the furthest second-floor window would win. The two boys laughed and enjoyed themselves while picking up more rocks from the ground, until Rolex's rock smashed through the window. Both boys seemed equally shocked upon hearing Charbon's cannon sound. After a moment of silence, Vulcan and Rolex burst out laughing, before slapping hands and walking back to the girls. They then suggested entering the mansion, as the rain had now stopped. Ceres seemed to agree. However, she stated that they would have to climb through a window, as the main entrance was probably guarded. The quartet then traveled around to the back of the mansion to a large window right over the kitchen stove. Rolex used the rock he had found and smashed a hole through the window. The glass shattered, and with Rolex leading, the careers carefully climbed in. At this time, Lauren commented that the tributes this year seemed to be doing equally well as tributes older than them, and that if she was unable to see their heights, she would have thought this was a regular game. Once Rolex and the three other careers were inside the kitchen, the four of them quietly headed to the door. The outliers had turned the careers, which caused all of them to stop attempting to booby-trap the door and look in the direction of the kitchen. The kitchen's door was behind the stairs, which meant that the outliers were unable to see the careers. However, when Rolex came around the corner, Ellery screamed and dropped her spear. Rolex laughed, and soon Lazuli, Ceres, and Vulcan followed and joined in the fight. Although they were outnumbered, the careers had more weapons and strength, which therefore gave them an advantage during this fight. Vulcan immediately tackled Ellery, and the two wrestled around on the ground, while Ceres punched Cuspid in the face. During this time, Pattern, Muller, and Faro somehow managed to run out the front door unnoticed, while Lazuli and Vulcan checked for supplies. In a few minutes, Ellery, Cuspid, and Spruce's cannons had sounded, which clearly unhinged Muller, Pattern, and Faro. However, they continued to run until they reached the forest directly south of the cornucopia and mansion front doors. Meanwhile, the careers had regrouped, and upon seeing blood all around them, they agreed to stay inside the mansion for the time being, and search for tributes potentially hiding within. As night fell, the careers gathered the spear, bread, and water dropped by their victims and placed it on the crouch, where they rested and agreed not to hunt for any more tributes for the time being. That night, the portraits of Dame and Charbon, both of 5, Cruz and Ellery, both of 7, Aslan of 8, and Cuspid of 12 were shown in the sky, which left 10 tributes remaining. The careers had seen these portraits on the screens around the mansion, and when Ceres was sure Lazuli and Rolex had fallen asleep, she woke Vulcan and nodded towards the tributes from 1. Vulcan seemed to realize what she was talking about, and therefore returned a wink before lying back down and sleeping soundly. Inside the Southland forests, Pattern, Faro, and Muller attempted to sleep. However, they both became very unnerved after seeing their allies' portraits in the sky. Pattern attempted to calm down Faro and Muller. However, he himself seemed to be equally uncomfortable upon seeing Aslan's portrait, and therefore the three had a rough night of sleep. In the morning, the sun rose and seemed to cause more heat throughout the arena. Upon waking up, Pattern heard a low growling sound coming from within the forest. He quickly woke up Muller and Faro before asking what the sound was. Faro turned around, and upon seeing a large brown bear, he screamed and began to run. Muller and Pattern noticed this bear as well, and they began to run as well. However, they did not seem nearly as panicked as Faro. The bear closed in. The bear chased the tributes, and as the bear closed in, Pattern screamed upon seeing a large swarm of bees closing in. Pattern immediately ran the opposite direction, while Muller seemed extremely confused. Muller then looked around at Pattern running through the bushes escaping the bees, while Faro ran away from the bear. He began to walk back to the forest. However, he noticed the bloodied zombie slowly walking towards him. Upon hearing a cannon and seeing the bear eating up Faro, Muller screamed and swore before running directly toward the mansion. While the zombie approached Muller, Pattern had run around the mansion in an attempt to escape the bees. However, after noticing the bees continuing to follow him, Pattern threw himself to the ground and tried to stay still. Viewers in Snow Square tensed as the bees angrily flew over his back. Khen announced that Pattern's heart rate had increased to a high as the bees' buzz, while Lauren announced that although these were capital mutts, they were designed to act like normal bees. After a tense moment, the bees flew away from Pattern, which saw him slowly stand up and look around. After realizing that the bees had indeed flown away, Pattern slowly walked around to the tennis court and hid behind the net. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, the careers had been attacked similarly. Rolex was seen to have been attacked by a large gang of older kids, who laughed at him and pointed fingers. This seemed to anger Rolex more, which saw him attack them. However, the kids tackled Rolex back and seemed impervious to his attacks. As Rolex screamed, the other careers focused on their own respective attacks. Upon seeing Lazuli get attacked by several large spiders, Sirius yelled at Vulcan to run. The two ran up the mansion stairs. However, upon hearing Lazuli's cannon, Sirius stopped and screamed. Upon noticing the walls around her closing in, Vulcan noticed this as well and ran. However, when Sirius followed, it soon became eerily clear that the walls were closing in on Sirius only. Sirius shouted at Vulcan. However, as the walls were about to cross Sirius, Vulcan swore and narrowly dodged a syringe shot at him. As Sirius shouted about being squished, Vulcan tried to dodge more syringes. However, they continued to be fired at him. Vulcan swore and hastily appeared to think. However, upon noticing Sirius, who was standing still, he ran towards Sirius and hid behind her. Sirius screamed and swore at Vulcan. However, the syringes aimed at Vulcan seemed to hit the walls beside Sirius instead of Vulcan himself. After a while, the needles seemed to stop and the walls around them gradually reverted to their original shape. Sirius then appeared to stop shaking and slowly asked Vulcan why he was scared of needles. Vulcan turned red. However, before he could answer, the pair heard a scream from downstairs. Sirius hurried to the stairs, where she saw Rolex angrily squaring and wiping pieces of the spiders from his shirt. Viewers had seen that Rolex had put up a brave fight against the spiders, and had managed to succeed in killing them. Sirius called for Vulcan, and together the two charged toward Rolex. Although Rolex tried to fight, he seemed too tired from the spiders, and therefore was easily overpowered by the two tributes from 2, and therefore stabbed through the head with Vulcan's sword. After hearing Rolex's cannon, Pattern got up and walked around the tennis court, before running towards the forests. Once inside the forest, Pattern was pleased to receive a sponsor gift, which contained a bottle of water. Pattern thanked the sky before putting all his supplies on the ground in front of him. His supplies consisted of 1 spear, 2 loaves of bread, and a water bottle. As Pattern walked, he noticed Soil of 11 in the distance, whose head was surrounded in a dark cloud. Soil seemed to be screaming loudly, which caused Pattern to run towards him. As Soil continued to shriek, Pattern walked over and appeared to realize that Soil could not hear him. Therefore, Pattern raised his spear, and after Khen quietly muttered, "Do it," he stabbed Soil in the neck. Soil screamed even more as blood gushed out from his wound. However, Pattern quickly removed his spear and ran away from Soil's body. Upon hearing Soil's cannon, Vulcan and Sirius ran outside the mansion and towards Soil's body. However, upon realizing that there were no useful supplies, Sirius suggested that they run inside, as whatever had killed Soil may still be around. Vulcan agreed, and once the pair were inside the mansion, night began to fall. Lauren quickly assessed each remaining tribute's location, as night began to fall. Surprisingly, Jerome of 6 was the only tribute to be still hiding within the mansion. He, however, was hidden within the movie theater, after narrowly outrunning a rogue compactor. Meanwhile, Bermuda of 4 was hidden beside the boiler room after being splashed by blood. While Moeller of 12 was hidden within a forest. Once night had fallen, the tributes around the arena seemed phased by the cold. However, they seemed to deal with this finally when the portions of Rolex and Lazuli, both of 1, Faro of 9, and Soil of 11 were shown in the sky. This left Vulcan and Sirius both of 2, Bermuda of 4, Jerome of 6, Pattern of 9, and Muller of 12 remaining. Early in the morning, Pattern awoke and began to run towards the broken-back kitchen window. However, upon hearing a cannon, he stopped and seemed to contemplate his actions. As a hovercraft collected a body from not too far behind him, Pattern quietly stated that he loves his family and friends, before climbing through the window. This cannon belonged to Bermuda of 4, after she had begun to travel. However, unfortunately for her, a large flock of bats that had just been released from the perimeter swarmed around her and killed her. Vulcan awoke Ceres, and together they readied their weapons upon hearing Bermuda's cannon. Vulcan and Ceres quickly stood up, and to their delight, they noticed Jerome of 6 running across the room. Jerome screamed and began to run faster. However, Vulcan threw a knife, which nailed Jerome in the head as he ran and saw him collapse to the ground. Jerome's cannon sounded, which caused Vulcan to shout with glee once the death claw reached through the ceiling. During this time, Pattern was silently watching this fight from the shadows within the kitchen. Pattern appeared shocked, however he held onto his spear tightly when an announcement boomed into the arena. Game Maker Blanco congratulated the tributes on reaching the Final 4. However, before he could finish his announcement, Vulcan had stabbed Ceres through the head. He grinned from ear to ear as Game Maker Blanco stuttered and continued. Game Maker Blanco stated that the remaining tributes had 5 minutes to make it to the movie theater, or else the trackers would detonate. He ended his announcement by wishing the tributes luck. However, he seemed clearly surprised by the sudden death. As Vulcan ran toward the movie theater, where a loud alarm sound was emanating from, Pattern ran towards Ceres' body. Pattern quickly frisked her body for any useful supplies. However, he only discovered a sword. Pattern therefore took the sword and held it out in his left hand while holding the spear in his right. He proceeded to run into the movie theater just mere seconds before the 5 minutes ran out. Once at the theater, Vulcan had immediately spotted Muller running through another door. Vulcan laughed and threw his knife. However, Muller dodged and proceeded to pick up the knife. Vulcan seemed surprised. However, he readied another knife and prepared to throw it. At this time, Pattern ran through the doors and saw Vulcan and Muller preparing to fight. Therefore, he ran to the back row of seats and unnoticed and hid there. As Pattern watched the fight, he seemed distracted by the screen above, which showed a boy slamming an axe into a girl's head. The girl had one eye, which seemed to disgust Pattern. However, he looked away and focused on the fight instead. Vulcan had just hit Muller in the shoulder with a knife, which caused Muller to collapse. He then laughed and threw another knife into Muller's head, killing him instantly. As Muller's cannon sounded, Vulcan turned around and seemed to notice the screen, which showed a young girl wearing clothing made of wire while dodging a battery thrown at her. Vulcan seemed to recognize this footage. However, before he could finish viewing it, Pattern sprang forward and tackled Vulcan to the ground. The two boys screamed, and after a brief scuffle, Pattern managed to get the upper hand, bashing Vulcan's face into the ground multiple times. Pattern then reached for a sword, which he had dropped when tackling Vulcan. However, in this split second, Vulcan punched Pattern's genitals, which caused him to scream in pain. Vulcan then ran forwards and stabbed Pattern's area multiple times, which caused Pattern to scream even louder. As Pattern writhed in pain, Vulcan collapsed on the ground beside him, and after a long amount of time, Pattern's cannon finally sounded. It was then announced that Vulcan Helix of District 2 was the victor of the 105th Hunger Games, amid lots of cheering in Snow Square. After being carried out of the arena on a stretcher, it was announced that Vulcan was unconscious and in need of urgent medical treatment. Vulcan was then taken to Gull Hospital, where he was treated for his wounds. Not only did Vulcan sustain multiple wounds throughout the fight, he was also unfortunate enough to have broken his nose and jawbone. Therefore, Vulcan spent 2 weeks recovering in a private ward within the hospital awaiting surgery. During this time, he was visited by Rubius, who treated him like a son, as well as Maxima, who entertained him and brought him capital food every day. Maxima later claimed that this was because Vulcan explicitly stated that he did not like the hospital food that was provided. However, he was forced to eat some of it because it was easy for him to chew. After about a month, Vulcan's long-awaited victor's interview took place. For this event, Vulcan was dressed in a dazzling gold suit, adorned with miniature knife patterns along the side. This outfit was well received by both Capital and the audience. As Vulcan stepped onto the stage, he was cheered and welcomed by viewers alike. After he had sat down, Lauren shook his hand and began to ask the usual questions. Lauren began by asking him how he felt about killing his district partner, Ceres. Vulcan replied to this by saying that he had to do it sooner or later, and that he had not formed a big bond with her anyways. This caused lots of cheering within the audience. Lauren then complimented Vulcan on speaking and fighting very maturely, and that if it wasn't for the height differences, she would have thought he was older. This caused Vulcan to smile and thank Lauren. For the final part of the interview, Lauren curiously asked Vulcan if he was actually scared of needles. This made him turn very red, and without further ado, he thanked Lauren for her time without answering the question. When Game Maker Blanco walked on the stage, he calmly shook Lauren and Vulcan's hands before turning to the audience and telling them a few facts about the games. Game Maker Blanco told viewers that the disasters each tribute experienced were in fact designed to target their worst fears. He was then interrupted by Lauren, who asked how he had found out each tribute's worst fear. To this, he replied that he had sought some help during the training assessments, and without further detail, he chatted with Lauren. After Game Maker Blanco had taken a bow, Lauren quickly motioned for Rubius to walk onto the stage. Lauren asked Rubius a quick question about how he felt about finally seeing a male tribute from his district emerge victorious. To this, Rubius replied that he would treat Vulcan like a son, and that he was very proud of him. This triggered sympathetic sounds from the audience. Once the clapping had died down, Rubius also announced that it was Vulcan's birthday. This seemed to shock multiple crowd members, and a cape was wheeled onto the stage. Vulcan thanked everyone for coming. Instead of dismissing the crowds, Lauren, Game Maker Blanco, Rubius, and the Peacekeepers joined in on the celebrations that took place immediately after Vulcan's birthday cake was wheeled in. And together, Vulcan celebrated his 13th birthday in Dalton Studios. After returning to District 2 the following week, Vulcan was shocked to learn that both his parents had been found dead in their homes a day after his victor's interview. This seemed to unhinge him, and along with multiple rumors that Ceres' parents had committed murder, this was never proved, and therefore Vulcan went on to be raised by Rubius in the capital,